Hey guys, welcome back to What the Fat. Yesterday we talked about a topic that I was really passionate about. You guys got a little insight from my history playing baseball, and it's really that you're only as good as your last at bat. And you kind of got a different perspective on that from me, and kind of my perspective on, you know what, you're only as good as your current at bat, your next at bat. That's what you should be focusing on. So today I'm going to jump into a topic that I think is really interesting. I get approached about it all the time. It's one of the things that I get a ton of questions on social media. I get approached from companies that want me to write stories about this or write articles on media outlets. And this concept of fat coffee, keto coffee, bulletproof coffee, whatever you want to call it. It's putting something in some sort of fat inside of your coffee first thing in the morning, and for whatever reason you're trying to do that or achieve. And so I'm sitting here right now. I got my coffee mug that someone actually sent this to me that was following me on social media. It says, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." And kind of this prop that has a full stick of butter in your coffee. And it's mind-blowing to me. Mind-blowing to me, this craze, how it's kind of grown, but in some essence got out of control, right? And we'll talk a little bit about it in this podcast of, are there benefits to doing this? And what are some of the potential downsides or negatives of putting a ton of fat or calories, that for that matter, first thing in the morning inside your coffee? So first, let's start with, what is this? What constitutes, for some people might be like, I've never heard of bulletproof or fat or keto coffee, whatever you want to call it. Some people may have never heard of that. But a lot of you are actually very familiar because now you're seeing it pop up all over the place. Not only is it out in California, but it's all over the world now where people are kind of implementing this concept. And basically there's different ways to do it. I don't think there's one foundational way of saying, oh, this is the way you must make this keto or fat coffee. A lot of times the main constituent is one of the following: butter, coconut oil, or MCT oil or powder. And we'll discuss those as well. But those are really the main constituents. Not all of them together, either one or a combination of them, but oftentimes people really refer to it with the butter. I guess that's kind of the one that took people by surprise. It's been all over the media, it's been all over news outlets where it's like, put butter in your coffee to melt away fat, or the new bulletproof craze of having a ton of fat in your coffee leads to this. All these different things have come up. So one of the things, that's where it really starts, is the type of coffee is one whole constituent, but then what goes into the coffee? The butter, the MCT, the coconut. On top of that, now you have a whole nother aspect of, well, is it butter or is it ghee? Which one's more beneficial? And butter and ghee are two very different things, similar but have different properties. The next thing comes up is, all right, if you're using MCT oil or you're using MCT powder, what type of MCT powder are you using? Are you using MCT powder that's bound to maltodextrin, bound to acacia fiber, bound to soluble corn fiber? Does that make a difference? Are you using primarily C8? Are you using a combination of C8, C10, C12? All of these different things factor into what someone puts into their coffee first thing in the morning. What once used to be, hey, let me just put a little cream and sugar, now has turned into this like science experiment of, can I fit an entire tub of butter inside of my coffee first thing in the morning to really optimize brain function and performance? And that's really the challenge, right? And that's what we want to get into here. So really where it all started is that realm. It started in, I want to optimize my brain function, mental clarity, focus first thing in the morning. And this concept of having this fat coffee first thing in the morning is ultimately may be able to aid in that. And we'll discuss why. Where it really stemmed from is, if you're getting in, even if you're not on a ketogenic diet, even if you're eating semi-low carbish, if you have an ample amount of fat and coffee, which has caffeine in it, which has also been shown by my good friend and colleague, Dr. Stephen Cunnane, to increase ketone levels. On top of that, you have either MCTs or coconut or butter, and those increase ketone levels. Likely where the benefit of this first morning coffee that has fat in it is coming from is you're getting an ample amount of ketone levels. And you see this happening all over Silicon Valley, right? These guys are going to Starbucks or wherever the heck they're getting their coffee from, and they're putting in a ton of fat into it because they feel great. Well, imagine feeling that way all the time, right? You're on a ketogenic diet, or even people supplementing with exogenous ketones and or MCTs throughout the day. Like, they're getting this bump in ketone levels, and that's really what's likely causing that enhanced cognitive function, that enhanced focus that they're getting from consuming something like this, which is really interesting. Now, the question becomes, is this beneficial for body composition? Is it actually beneficial for cognitive function or mental performance? I kind of addressed the first part of that, the cognitive function, mental performance. If you're consuming coffee by itself and you have some sort of MCTs, coconut, and or butter, ghee inside of it, you likely will get a bump in ketones, undoubtedly, especially if you're coming off an overnight fast. If that's the only thing you're consuming, right? That doesn't mean that you're consuming this with a meal or you're consuming it with something else. If that's the only thing you're consuming, you're likely going to see a bump or increase in ketone levels, which certainly may have a beneficial effect on cognitive function and mental clarity. Absolutely. So I think that's really where a lot of people want to use this fat coffee, keto coffee, bulletproof coffee first thing in the morning. I think a lot of them go for the mental clarity, the cognitive function, which is great. Something to keep in mind. However, on the flip side, we need to discuss this body composition thing, right? Media outlets take this concept and kind of spin it to make a crazy headline, and they'll go, hey, drinking this coffee first thing in the morning helps melt away fat. Well, is that really the case? Here's the thing. It depends, right? It depends on a lot of things. If you're drinking coffee, let's just think about this logically. If you're drinking coffee with a stick of butter in it, that now probably equates 1,000 or 1,500 calories first thing in the morning. And on top of that, you then go have breakfast with that. All of a sudden, you're at 1,500, 2,000 calories before you walk out the door to go to work. Is that likely going to be optimal for fat loss? Probably not, right? So it all depends on the context. Everything's context driven. On the other hand, it may be beneficial, and here's why. If you're actually utilizing a small amount of MCTs, a small amount of butter, a small amount of coconut oil, first thing in the morning, you're blending up the coffee, which is a whole nother aspect. I talked about this recently in a sense that one of the benefits of blending your coffee, not only do you get the froth on top, which everyone loves, but it actually adds more volume. And there's a whole concept that we can actually go into in another podcast of adding volume to your foods. That's why I'm a big fan of like Cobb salads. Adding volume to your foods actually helps increase satiety. So rather than having like a small shot of espresso, you're having like this huge cup of coffee that now you amplified because you blended it up. But back to the point, you're getting a small amount of coconut oil, small amount of MCT, small amount of butter in your morning coffee if that's the only thing you're consuming. And now you feel full, right? Say it ends up being 150, 250 calories, but that allows you to now go to work, be cognitively alert, not be hungry, be satiated up until 1 or 2 or 3 o'clock when you have lunch or you have a snack, then yes, then you will see these benefits of body composition. That's where I really see this benefit of fat coffee or having some type of fat inside the first thing you eat first thing in the day being beneficial. Myself, I don't consume coffee every day. I'm very sensitive to caffeine. Even sometimes you could do decaf or other things. I don't consume coffee every single day. But when I do, I tend to put a scoop of MCTs in there. And the reason I do that is because that kind of helps me push that limit. It helps me, rather than eat at 12, I might not eat until 1:30 now because I'm more satiated from 100 calories that I've gotten from MCTs and maybe some heavy cream or something like that. So that's where the true benefit comes from, if it allows you to push that fasting period further. And that's one thing I hope you really take home from this episode, is that the benefits of the bulletproof or the fat coffee itself aren't necessarily like, hey, I'm drinking this and there's some magic in it that's going to make it melt away fat. It's that you're getting a high quality amount of fats, you're increasing ketone levels, which is great, but you're also hopefully providing some satiety to then further enhance that fasting period. Which brings us to a really interesting point, and something that comes up all the time is, can I fat fast? Really, besides protein, probably one of the most controversial topics in the keto world. Actually, probably behind artificial sweeteners and behind protein is probably this concept of fat fasting. Do I have to only drink water? Do electrolytes knock me out of the fast? Does fat knock me out of the fast? There still needs to be a ton of research on this, quite honestly. I mean, obviously, if it's feasible and possible to only do water and maybe do some electrolytes, that's great. That's wonderful. However, the question always gets brought up, if I just have MCTs or I just have coconut oil, does that negate my fast? I think there's a certain level that, yes, if you're consuming 1,000 calories of MCTs, butter, or coconut oil first thing in the morning, that likely will negate your fast, right? You're probably going to get some gluconeogenesis from the glycerol and some of these different constituents of the fat that probably will. However, what I do is I'll do like 250 or less calories from MCT or coconut oil. And there was actually a study. In 1992, this study was published, and it basically found that carbohydrate restriction is what dictated the response to fasting. So what they did in the study was they took two groups. They had one group that completely fasted for 82 hours, and they had the other group who received a straight fat infusion, right? They infused fat into them. They looked at insulin, glucagon, ketones, glucose, everything you can imagine, all these different blood markers, no differences between the two. Right? Think about that. No differences between the two. And yet, a lot of times people argue, well, you have to completely fast. Is there such a concept of fat fasting? I think the devil's in the dose. I think if you're having a small amount of a high-quality fat, if it's butter, if it's coconut oil, which I'd recommend for that kind of concept, MCT oil can be good, but a lot of people don't like the slimy feeling that it can leave on your lips. MCT oil powder, you have to be extremely careful about and make sure you're vetting your sources the right way, because in order to make MCT a powder, it needs to be plated on something. Oftentimes they'll plate it either on glucose, they'll plate it on acacia fiber, sometimes they'll plate it on all these different types of quote-unquote fibers, which is a whole nother discussion, but you just need to be careful about it. I use a MCT powder that's plated on soluble corn fiber or digestion-resistant tapioca fiber. Those are the two that I've tested on myself for blood glucose, blood ketones. That doesn't increase glucose, doesn't increase insulin. Those are the best that work for me. But if you're going to go that route, I would technically still consider that a fat fast. It's the same thing with exogenous ketones, right? If you're utilizing exogenous ketones or you're utilizing a pure fat, you're really not negating that effect of fasting if you're not increasing glucose, insulin, or blunting ketone production. So you need to be kind of like your own scientist or own experimenter in this capacity of what really negates that response to fasting. I think the devil's in the dose, and I think the dose is going to differ for everyone, depending upon your metabolic state, where you're at, what you're doing, all of these different things. So that's kind of my take on fat fasting. I think it is certainly possible. I think a lot of people can and should likely incorporate it in. Where I don't think it's beneficial is people that go, hey, I'm just going to stick a ton of butter inside my coffee first thing in the morning, but then I'm still going to have 3 eggs, bacon, and avocado, and then 3 hours later eat lunch, right? You're packing on a hefty amount of calories first thing in the morning, and to then try and negate that the rest of the day is going to be challenging, right? Whereas if you have a moderate amount of calories to help increase that satiety or fullness factor, and then kind of push that quote-unquote fat fasting period a little bit later on, that's where the true benefit comes from. So that's my thought. I think there's benefits to it. I think it's a tool. I don't think everyone needs to do it, but I really wanted to put that in context because a lot of people are reaching out about this and saying, is this beneficial? Should I do this? If it can help you push that period longer and it's not an exorbitant amount of calories, I'd recommend doing it, right? It helps increase satiety. It tastes good. I don't see any downside to it. It can help increase ketone production. but in the same token, just be aware of it. Just be conscious of it and make sure you're not blowing it out of the water. So I hope you guys took away a little bit from that on fat fasting, on bulletproof fat, keto coffee, whatever you want to call it. First thing in the morning, I think it can be a useful tool, but don't get carried away with it. And I think that's something to keep in mind. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. Tomorrow, you'll hear all about our experience working with one of the top mentors, the top business coaches in the world, Tony Robbins. So I hope you guys enjoy that, get to take away some really good tidbits from what it's like working with someone of that caliber on a daily basis. So that's amazing. I appreciate you guys. Keep tuning in. Definitely leave us a review. Let us know what else you'd like to hear. And with that, make positivity louder. I'll talk to you guys soon.